on that note, shall we engage in some lighthearted escapism?
I cannot wait. I've been calling this chapter a travel montage, because that's basically what it is for Elayne. It's her and Name Salad traveling.
We are setting up for Ispan's murder, but she doesn't actually get murdered yet. I kind of was like, oh no, is this the chapter she gets murdered? No, not this one yet, but we are heavily setting up Ispan and getting killed.
And we were talking to Morgan that she said, Elayne is in, she's 25% of the pages in this book, but it's only this chapter and then chapter 28 are the only two Elayne chapters left in this book. Right.
Elayne heavily held down the opening of this book with the Bowl of the Wind sequence, but this is her penultimate chapter for this book. And the rest of it, you said, is all Rand with perhaps a smattering of White Tower POVs.
Yeah, some Elida and maybe a Forsaken, I think.
So that's where we're at. We are travel montaging with an absolute circus. Elayne has yet another circus arc that nobody talks about, and it's when she's traveling with this circus.
Well, she certainly turns a few tricks at the end of this one.
Yes, this is the smooth red rod. Well, it's not smooth, but this is the red rod chapter.
Right. It's quite veiny, actually.
So yeah, ready for me to read us into a chapter that I would summarize as being travel, transitions, and ter'angreal.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Chapter 20. Into Andor. And our symbol is the Lion of Andor. Elayne hoped that the journey to Caemlyn would go smoothly, and in the beginning, it seemed to do so. She thought that even as she and Avienda and Brigida sat, bone-weary and huddled in the rags that remained of their clothing, filthy with dirt and dust and the blood of the injuries they had received when the gateway exploded. In 2 weeks at most, she would be ready to present her claims to the Lion Throne. There on the hilltop, Nynaeve healed their numerous hurts and spoke barely a word, certainly not berating them. Surely that was a pleasant sign, if unusual. Relief at finding them alive battled worry on her face. Lan's strength was necessary to remove the Shan-Chang crossbow bolt from Brigida's thigh before she could be healed of that wound. But although her face drained of blood and Elayne felt a stab of agony through the bond, agony that made her want to cry out, her warder barely groaned through her gritted teeth. Taishar Kandor, Lan murmured, tossing the pile-head quarrel, made to punch through armor, aside on the ground. True blood of Kandor. Brigida blinked, and he paused. Forgive me if I erred. I assumed from your clothes you were Kandori. Oh, yes, Brigida breathed. Kandori. Her sickly grin might have been from her injuries. Nynaeve was impatiently shooing Lan out of the way so she could lay hands on her. Elayne hoped the woman knew more of Kandor than the name. When Brigida had last been born, there had been no Kandor. She should have taken it as an omen.
Yeah, there's a little bit of just Brigida's cover story sucks because she doesn't know anything about Kandor.
She's never bothered to put together a cover story. It's the weirdest oversight. She's so concerned with hiding her identity and puts literally no effort into doing so.
Are you kidding me? She does nothing to hide her identity. She wears her braids. She goes by Brigida. She uses a bow. And she doesn't know her own cover story. She's just basically, yeah, I'm Brigida, what?
Why would you think that I'm Brigida? I'm just Brigida. What's wrong with you?
Right. But yeah, I almost think somebody who's just someone be like, yeah, I'm Napoleon. I'm just a short guy who knows war. And I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a modern day equivalent of someone who was walking around. If you met somebody who called themselves Napoleon, you wouldn't think it was Napoleon.
I mean, yeah, and it's a good example because, he's dead.
Yeah.
Brigida's dead. Yeah, no, the myth does not suddenly become manifest exactly as told in myth. That's not how that works.
Right. But then at the same time, the fact that she has no cover story is just okay, well, what are you? Who are you? Where did you come from? You'd think there'd be some suspicious with everybody, investigating Elayne and all that kind of stuff. Who is this random warder that she keeps around her?
Yeah, it's unbelievable and ridiculous. entirely. It's comical. It's funny. I enjoy the situational comedy that arises from that oversight, but it makes no sense.
And I think that's why it's an oversight, is because Jordan's setting up the comedy around it. And he's like, I'm not going to create this sort of cover story. She's not going to research Kandor. Like, also, there's no Google. Like, she doesn't know any Kandoris. There's no Kandori here for them to ask questions about. It's not like Elayne knows anything about Kandor, much less Nynaeve.
Sure. But like, you'd think that Brigida would put some effort into asking Elayne, like, hey, can you help me construct a cover story so that I can have a consistent story to give to the people of this time, so that way it makes sense and I don't have to invent shit. You'd think they would have that conversation, but for whatever reason, she chooses not to go that direction.
And Lan would be a good person to have that conversation with because he knows Kandoris. They're Borderlanders, like he is. Right,
but that would involve bringing him in on the secret, which is not going to happen.
Eye roll. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this line. Lan's strength was necessary to remove the Shanshan crossbow bolt from Brigida's thigh before she could be healed. And this happens a lot where someone has to yank out an arrow, or I think it happens with like Perrin too when he gets the gut shot.
It's a thigh shot, actually. Oh, no, it's a rib shot. It's in his ribs. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Like, we can't heal this until the arrow comes out.
Why not just use flows of air to pull the damn thing out? Like, you can pick somebody up. Surely you can pull out an arrow.
Yeah.
That's my only comment about that, is it's something that Jordan does. Maybe it's just like a blind spot, but it's like, yeah, you have the strength to pull it out with flows of air.
Well, I think it's more just a matter of like, well, obviously it's sunk in so hard that he's going to come over and do that because it's a battlefield thing. And it's like, it's just the Aes Sedai would have to like fumble around a bit and then decide to use the power, whereas he just goes for it because obviously that's what you would do on the battlefield, right? You don't normally have Aes Sedai helping you with that kind of injury. So he just is like, well, that clearly needs my assistance.
Mm-hmm. It just piles on to the uselessness of the yellows, is it's like...
And the greens.
And the grains, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's... And also the limits of how he imagined the magic system that we have now expanded because we've spent so many decades collectively as a fandom improving on this stuff and talking through things in our our theories channel and places like that, where we've figured out all kinds of like, well, you could just... Like, it's obvious now, but I don't know that he can be faulted for not thinking through, like, literally millions of thought hours like the rest of us have.
I created a consistent enough system that we can be like, oh, it's just people didn't think of it.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I want to talk about in that is where Lan says Taishar Kandor, which I feel like is one of those... Taishar has become a bit of a greeting among our community, or a bit of like a good job or congratulations. And I think like its use here helps with that, where it's not just like Taishar Manetheren or Taishar. It's like, yeah, that is actually like good job, or I'm impressed with you is what that says.
Right. I mean, yeah, but it was like Taishar Rigney, which is like true blood of Robert Jordan. That part didn't make sense. But no, I mean, definitely using it as just sort of like a verbal thumbs up. Like, you demand. It's kind of like, is that sort of like lifting up affirmation of like, you are in fact the shiznit, which is cool. It's a neat greeting.
Next paragraph, we get Elayne saying, be sure of yourself, girl, but not too sure.
Good advice.
Yep. Be confident, but not arrogant.
Right. Believe in yourself, but pay attention to the world around you and read the room.
Or else you're going to be that one Borderlander who gets overwhelmed. She's the leader of...
Oh, Tenobia?
Tenobia.
Oh, yeah. She's not the leader of Tenobia, but leader of Saldea.
She's Queen Tenobia. Yeah, Queen Tenobia, leader of Saldea. Yep, I feel like she's a little too sure of herself. She fell off the other end of that saying.
Very, very much so. But yes, I highlighted that also. Like, Lenny!
Yeah, anytime we get a Lenny saying, you got to bring him up.
So yeah, they get to the house where they are trying to find accommodations for over 200 people that just showed up at dusk, basically. Are like, okay, so we are tired, scared, hungry, and there's over 200 of us. Like, that's a lot. So the house that Elayne has taken them to is the house of like an old family retainer, the Hornwells, and they are very accommodating and very open. There's nothing interesting about them. They just are good people that respond to Elayne as she expected them to. And nonetheless, it's still an intense bustle to get everyone settled. And you have the reactions of all the different groups, which are all unsurprising, but take up several pages.
So you've got kin, you've got at least 20 Windfinders, you've got 8 Aes Sedai.
Yes.
The nobles who are hanging around.
You've got some craftspeople, some high-level craftspeople. You've got a banker. You've got this whole like piece of the cover story for the kin, right? You've got 8 nobles specifically, and a handful more people who are similarly privileged, who are part of the cover story of the farm, where it's just a retreat for rest and relaxation, and they just happened to be there when the attack happened, and they're very upset because this is not what they signed up for, right? The kin, at least, are women who can channel, who are used to hiding, and though they are now feeling safe enough to cry, this has always been part of their lives, and they know that that's always a danger lurking, that they might have to pick up and move. That's part of being a kinswoman. These nobles, these craftswomen, like, they are completely caught by surprise by this, and they are caught up by total accident. The Windfinders are like on a diplomatic mission to go just a few miles from the sea. Like, the whole going to the Kins's farm was because it wasn't far from the ocean. They are now in Andor. You know, like, they are suddenly, for survival reasons, completely displaced from the ocean and their ships, and are very unmoored.
Thinking about modern, obviously, Ukraine was recently invaded, and I'm thinking about the Ukraine invasion and like the Seanchan invading Abu Dar, and then you have these refugees who are fleeing to England. I mean, Camelin. There's a certain amount of like, this is a refugee crisis that Elayne is managing from some of the upper crust who have fled. And maybe some of these people should have fled because obviously they would have been imprisoned, right? A lot of these people are channelers. They would have been imprisoned and enslaved by the Seanchan.
Right. Elayne was rich enough in this case, meaning powerful enough to create a fast way to get a small group of people out at the very front of the invasion. Right. She had a big airplane that she was able to load up with a bunch of people and hop them all the way over. It's not the wave of people who are walking into the nearest country over. This is one of the people who has enough power and prestige and material wealth / magical power to grab a chunk of people and up and relocate them. But yeah, that's absolutely that.
And by coincidence, Ta'veren coincidence, not exactly Ta'veren coincidence, but like by coincidence, they happen to be in this meeting with some of those powerful groups of people all at once when the invasion happened. Right.
I mean, say you're a normal aide working at a government office and they evacuate the staff. Right. And it's because you were working that day that you get evacuated through that channel instead of some other channel.
And it makes me wonder how many of these people left families behind, left loved ones behind, left children behind.
More or less all of them, except for the kin specifically, because, well, kin and Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
The Windfinders left their entire people behind. But yeah, all of the women who were on retreat, they have lives they are retreating from. They don't know how their loved ones are doing, and we never get a single word of dialogue anywhere in the books to talk about efforts to reconnect them with their families at all. That's something that never even gets brought up as an issue. They just pick up and move on with their lives. All of that suffering is done behind the scenes on the page here. Yeah, that makes it feel a lot different reading this, thinking about an active refugee crisis going on. I mean, obviously there's refugee crisis happening a lot, but the prescience of the news and this chapter, that's and that framing brings it home. Yeah.
It's hard not to bring, obviously I'm spending a lot of time listening to news and thinking about the Ukraine thing and having that in my head. It's hard not to immediately see the parallels.
Yeah.
But it's not a perfect analogy.
No, magic power and literal magic chattel slavery always makes those comparisons a little sticky. But, we can take pieces from it. All right, back to escapism.
Sure.
Elise is badass. Paragraphs and paragraphs of Elise is a badass.
As much as I do agree that Elise is a badass, I do not think it's a well-written... I don't feel that she's a badass. I'm being told she's a badass. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like,
I don't know why everybody listens to Elise other than she has personality, right? But like, what personality, right? Like,
I think she's supposed to be Nynaeve once Nynaeve masters her emotions. I think that's what she's supposed to be. It's just she's literally Nynaeve if Nynaeve had better control, better emotional maturity. And I think that's what we're supposed to glean. And that's very unsatisfying for her to just be a carbon copy, washed out homeopathic grade version of a character we already know and love. Like she's very one dimensional. She's kind of OP with no explanation.
And she went to the tower. She was the one who wasn't powerful enough to become Aes Sedai.
Right.
So she was an apprentice at one point, although she has not admitted that yet. Or no, she was sent away. So she's not one of the ones who ran away. She was actually
Right.
sent away because she wasn't powerful enough.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Elise is one of the ones who has no interest in the tower's offer because they already said no to her once. But yeah, she does have a bit of Laris in her, a little bit, but Laris has more personality fleshed out. Elise always just feels very monotone. There's not a lot of character building with her. She's just already finished, and you don't get to see anything about what went into that.
Right, and you don't really have any history on her. We don't know a lot about her past. We don't know, between leaving the tower and becoming the ultimate wise.
Yeah, she's just intimidating to people in a way that Nynaeve finds very threatening and desirable at the same time.
The next thing I have is Adelius and Van Dien are taking Ispan to the woodcutter's hut and continuing the questioning, which we can get to a little more, but they're not getting anything out of her because of the oaths.
Yeah, this is the beginning of a pattern that they follow until Van Dien and Ispan get murdered. It is Van Dien that gets murdered, right?
Van Dien is green. No,
Van Dien is green. So no, right.
And she doesn't get murdered because she has warders, and the warders would have
one warder, but
alerted. Yes, one.
But yes, so it is Adelius and Ispan. So this is the pattern that will be followed until Adelius and Ispan are murdered.
Yes,
that's what starts here. Is this process of questioning? Which there's a little bit later in the chapter how that process is going before the double homicide. Yeah, and then Elayne takes a bath.
Woo! Elayne and baths. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
No,
it's only a 1-paragraph bath, so it's not a big one. It's not one of the big epic ones. It's just foreshadowing that there will be baths.
And they're telling dirty jokes. Brigida tells one about a woman getting her head caught between the slats of a fence, and it's like,
that's a very raunchy joke.
Yeah. I've seen pornos that start out that way.
And I mean, and a man getting Sagata spines in his ass, like that's that's the thing. It's hilarious. And I mean, Avienda being awkward about sitting in water, not about being naked, but about sitting in water. You know, we just get kind of a reminder of that Aiel experience that she's having, where she's learning to live wetlander ways and where her comfort zone is and all of that. And then her and Avienda comb their hair, brush each other's hair, because that's a nightly ritual for Near Sisters and not just a very normal thing for humans and primates across all of time and space.
And then they snuggled into the canopied bed in a small room. She and Avienda.
And Brigida and Nynaeve.
Well, you know.
It's supposed to be romantic, and then the other two pile in.
And meanwhile, Nynaeve is like, I am so fucking horny. I want to go have sex with my husband at every chance that I get. God, yes. Oh my God. I mean, this is a sexy chapter, right? Like, there's sexy jokes. There's a lot of sexy.
There's a lot of sexy implication in this chapter. Yeah,
absolutely. Like,
it's a remarkably raunchy chapter for Robert Jordan.
Really is. Like when you read what Nynaeve says about Lan, it is dirty.
And Lan is like chuckling to himself when she's like storming off and like holding her temper, and he is like laughing to himself like repeatedly throughout the chapter. Like, there is. Yeah.
And I 100% have headcanoned that Elayne and Avienda are lovers.
Oh, absolutely. I completely on board with that headcanon. Yeah. It makes so much sense to me. But possibly not in this situation, because they are sharing the bed with
they're sharing beds,
other women who are part of their immediate circle.
But I'm willing to bet this is some of the intimacy, like them traveling together, brushing each other's hair. They are sleeping in the same bed, even if they're not getting intimate. Like, they're still snuggling nightly. Like,
it's building up to that. I would agree that they probably aren't lovers yet. I don't know. I haven't really ever bothered to like timeline out that headcanon. It's there in the background.
Yeah, because at no point does Jordan ever explicitly say now they're like banging, right? So like,
right.
Exactly when that develops isn't clear, especially since it's not technically in the books. We are headcanoning that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, certainly by the time that they're living in the palace together in Andor, like, they're definitely lovers by then, but maybe not by now. But not by now, because I want to be first sisters declaration was the last time we were in this POV. when Elayne said, I think because you stayed for that explosion thing, we should become first sisters. So the relationship has just kicked up to a new notch. So, you know, that intimacy is developing at
They are now first sisters.
They're now betrothed to become first sisters.
Right.
So their intimacy is going to be going up across the course of between now and when they get to the palace. And at some point, I mean, they're sleeping in the same bed in the palace in her suite. Like, at that point, they definitely lovers. I don't.
Right. Right. Because Aviendha could has her own rooms, one would assume. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But like, no, they're just comforting each other. Jordan, we know what the word comforting means in your lexicon. You can't say they're just comforting each other with the lack of Rand and not mean that in a sexual way. You can't. It's against the rules. Anyway.
Nynaeve muttered half the night about the indecency of making a woman sleep apart from her husband. Damn it, I want to get railed.
Yeah, she's like, my back is not being broken right now, and I'm not okay with it. Yeah, 20 odd women who were the facade for the kin. There's 20 odd women who have been completely uprooted from their lives, who might have been fine living under the Shan-Chan, and their families are just assimilating quietly into the background of the Shan-Chan Empire. No big deal. And that could be these women's lives, except actually, now I'm saying that, some of them do get to go back. When they get to Caemlyn, Elayne does at some point set up a way to get them all back because she doesn't want to house them. So once she's in a stable...
But she can't really send them back to Abu Dar.
No, but she's able to dispatch them to whatever fate they want. I forget exactly how, but she does at one point, like, think to herself, okay, now I've gotten rid of all of them. That's an item off my list. They are all... And the same with the servants that they get. I'm pretty sure that she thinks that at some point. So I take it back. She does think about them.
And you have the physical book in front of you? I have a question for you. Starting with the paragraph, it was hardly a group that could escape notice.
Yes.
20 dark windfinders, awkward on their horses and bright as exotically plumaged birds. And does it say 8 Aes Sedai in your book or 9 Aes Sedai in your book? 9. My ebook says 8.
Okay. Getting out my correction pen.
So that is, I again, thank you to Encyclopedia Watt, but it did point out that the original count was 9, but it has been corrected.
Okay. I have now corrected my book.
That is an error in the original printings that has been updated in some of the ebooks.
Which also means that is an error in the audiobooks.
Yes. I didn't go through and figure out who the 8 versus 9 were. I think Ispan is counted in that 8. I don't think she was the 9th. That was my only question. Are they saying Ispan isn't the 9th? Are there 8 other Aes Sedai?
Yeah, it says, though one did ride with a leather sack over her head, of course.
So that means she would be included in the 8.
Right, but nobody knows that she's an Aes Sedai. So, yeah. So that's what that is. But yeah, I didn't bother going through either. Like, we know it's just Elaine's entourage circus.
Because I want to say isn't it? Obviously, Nynaeve and Elayne are counted among those two. Ispan, Vandene and Adelius, Marilla, Saritha gives me 7.
And the other one who's accused of potentially is the potential murder suspect. It's Saritha and this other woman.
Right, because Saritha, Marilla, and Karine. Careane. She's the Dark Friend.
I can't remember how they say her name in the audiobooks. But yes, the one who's actually the Dark Friend. That brings us up to 8.
Spelled Careane. Serene, maybe. Because God knows we don't have enough S names that we make the C names sound like S names.
Sure, then why? Carrie-Anne. Carrie-Anne?
No, that's not how it's pronounced in the audiobooks.
Carrie-Annie? I don't know. But yes, it is that one. We're agreeing about who it is, so.
Yes.
Okay.
But she is not in this chapter.
Nah, she's just in the background.
Do a quick search. She was mentioned in chapter 6 and then again in chapter 28, but she's not mentioned in chapter 20 as the 8th Aes Sedai.
But yeah, so that's the Aes Sedai who are in this group. Elayne is realizing that her party can't escape notice, but she is hoping that they can escape knowing that she is with the group. There's no reason for the daughter heir to be with this kind of group. So she's hoping to stay under the radar, and she's trying to get information about how her people feel about her and their concerns, as well as manage all of the potential explosions in the group. That's kind of the two tensions that we keep checking in on what's going on with that.
Right. And my understanding is she thinks she's like, I have to stay under the radar because I'm going to be confronted. These nobles are going to ride out and stop me from getting to Camelin. And that's going to be my biggest problem because everybody wants me to be queen. And these nobles are going to try and stop me because I'm their biggest opponent. And then what she finds out is that's not nobody cares about her. Everybody thinks she's dead. Like nobody's riding out to stop her because she's either dead or missing. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Like, and that's where she's like, uh-oh. Like, I have a bigger hill to climb, not because people think I'm the biggest opponent. They think I'm just irrelevant at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the big takeaway, is that everyone thinks she's been taken off the board, and so they've moved on.
Yep.
And they're much more concerned with the price of grain. Like, that comes up again and again, is this kitchen table politics over the succession. The common people don't care who is sitting on top of a pile of gold made out of their taxes. They care about feeding their families.
It's all about the price of gas.
That is the thing that she doesn't realize because she's a privileged princess and assumes that everyone cares about the divine right of kings more than daily survival.
And people are upset that Rand has declared. They're like, ugh, we don't want Rand to give her the throne, dumbass. Like, we'd rather just give it to somebody else.
That is a good thing. Yeah. They still have a sense of national pride in themselves. They still have national identity and they care, but they just assume Elayne isn't something that they can want. And they're like, yeah, Dylan's fine, I guess. She's cool.
Mm-hmm. Even the people who thought her mother had ruined the country and an end to the reign of House Trakand was good riddance still believed Rand al'Thor an invader. Mm-hmm. So it's like, even if they don't like her, they still like Rand less.
Right. And we get a clue about the politics that are going to dominate her arc. Dylan's as good as any. Now Morghese and her girl are dead. Some around here still speak up for Neon or Elenia, but I'm for Dylan. Mm-hmm. So those are the three names that come up again and again once we start to really get into that arc. We're being given those three names. Like, remember these three names. Those are the ones that are really going to stand out, and Dylan is the one that matters more because both the other two end up failing in the end. They both pose huge threats and then end up just folding under Elayne's overwhelming Taviran proximity force, basically.
And one other thing I want to talk about is timelines. This whole thing is happening right after they've used the Bowl to Win. So we've jumped back in time to before Egwene does her whole bid for Amyrlin's seat and the war, right? Because that all happens, it's snowing.
Yes.
Right? And this is all before the snows come.
Yes, this chapter takes up a lot of time. It basically, I think, gets us up to that night. I think that when they go into the world of dreams expecting to meet with her and don't see her, I think that's because that's the day that she's doing the thing. I think that she's in the hall making everyone sit up straight and listen.
Fair enough. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what's happening because I think this chapter covers that whole span.
Right. So timeline-wise, we have jumped back a bit and are just sort of in parallel moving forward in this.
You called it a montage, and that there's a reason.
Yeah. And it's also why, again, like, the beginning of this book was a week ago. Now we are, like, a week later. And we are 20 chapters into this book, and we're still only advanced a single week.
Yeah.
Or two. So there is a reason why these plot lines take longer, and it's because of stuff like this.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out about what the people think is that they are all blaming Rand for what's wrong with the land. A lot of the complaints about the rivers going dry and the crops failing and two-headed calves and stillbirths, and they're just blaming Rand for all this stuff to do with nature and to do with the land. And that's some of it's superstition. Some of it's how people respond to calamity, just pinning it on whoever the bogeyman is. And the dragon is one with the land and the land is one with the dragon.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm not sure how wrong they are. We've talked about how Rand is very hot and bothered and angry up until the end of the last book, and then he turns cold and Gwendiar, and you have Winter's Heart, and all of a sudden the world is encased in the winter. And, like, I do wonder how much of the dryness and the heat, yes, it's the Dark One, but maybe it's Rand.
I think it's a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, like there's a little bit of like, maybe it's the Dark One influencing Rand that's causing these problems, more so than the Dark One doing it directly, which fits into my theory that the Dark One can't destroy the world. He can only convince Rand to do it for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's fucking with Rand's head that's causing the weather to change more so than the Dark One influencing. I mean, that's a stretch a little bit because obviously there is like the Bowl of the Wind does break the Dark One's power. And this is sort of back to normal winter, I guess.
It's all one and the same. You know, there's this reductionist view. That's like the one that Egwene takes. You know, Ta'Veren can't affect you if they're not right here in the room with you. It's to take that farther out. It's like, is Rand influencing the pattern? Is the pattern influencing Rand? It's both, right? Like they use the bowl and he goes through this moment, this place where he passes through into being very cold at the end of the Dark One pushing all this heat where he was hot and bothered. Like the entire space-time continuum is being warped by this thing. It's a complete feedback loop through all the dimensions is kind of how I like to see it. Yeah.
The next little bit I have is the Ispan section. So,
you missed Elayne saying.
Oh, it isn't the stone you see that trips you on your nose. Yeah.
Cannot miss the Elayne sayings.
No. But I'm certainly talking about that's her conversation about how it's not the fact that she's trying to be stopped by other nobles. It's the fact that nobody cares about her anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, because she is learning again and again how very wrong she is. And that's an uncomfortable place to be. But she is wise enough to lean into it and accept it and process it. So the next thing I have actually is it Marillil has agreed to be their teacher. That ends up being the rest of her arc for the whole rest of the books, is being the gopher of the Windfinders. And it really sucks for her until she runs away with Talon, the apprentice, who also gets mentioned in this chapter.
And verify, Marillil is the one who bonded Lan.
No, that's Myrell.
Okay, right. I do confuse those two frequently.
Yes, they are very similar names, but Marell is a green with lots of warders, whereas Marillil is a gray that has, I don't think, any warders. She's a very different person and does very different things. But yeah, the names are really, really similar, and it's not fair.
Isn't Myrell in this group?
No.
Where is she right now?
Saladar. Well, with the Rebel Aes Sedai.
Gotcha. Right, because she didn't. That's correct. Right. Remembering how that worked, because she was confronted and punished by Egwene for keeping Lan secret.
Yes. And sends Lan to Ebudar, but not Myrell.
That's right. Okay. Catching back up on my memories. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, Marillil's experience with the Windfinders being just this constant stream of information for them, having to channel for them all the time, having to sleep with the apprentices and obey them like an apprentice, and all of that makes her run away with Talon later. That starts here because she somehow let herself agree to be the first teacher. And when the snows come, the Windfinders say, oh, well, clearly we did our part of the job. And so she's going to start teaching us literally as of this moment in time. And they don't get everything they want, but they do get her. And that is not fun for her.
I got to say, one of my least favorite things about the Sea Folk is the way they treat their teachers.
Yeah, it's real rude.
It's like, respect the knowledge.
Yeah, the concept of being disrespectful and downright abusive towards your teachers is like really hard to fathom how that's going to go well. I mean, you should respect people in general, but especially when you want them to teach you something that might be like a life or death skill. And yeah, ranking them low in the hierarchy makes no sense to me. I don't understand why teachers are given the same rank as people who are at the bottom of their learning curve. Apprentices, what?
I'd ask the same thing about public school teachers and the fact that they're paid less than fast food workers in our country. We do the same thing.
Man, see, I have so many reasons to be grateful. I had very little contact with that system, but oh my God, that's just... Where is the respect? Where is there? No, teaching is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It takes tons of effort. My teacher put in so much time.
So much work.
Our teacher-student ratio was tiny. You know, she put so much work in on such a small amount of students. And then I went to public high school where the student teacher ratios were so different. And how are they expected to do anything? They're getting no respect from the system at all. The system just uses them.
And I've heard, have you ever heard the saying, those who can't do, teach?
Yeah.
It's that sort of attitude of like, well, if you were good enough to not be a teacher, you wouldn't be a teacher. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? That is not how knowledge should be passed on. Passing on knowledge literally should be the utmost calling in our society.
Absolutely nodding. And I mean, that's part of why Masana turns to the shadow, right? You're not good enough to do the research you want to do. We're going to put you into the lesser category of teaching. That is why she turns to the dark side.
There's a reason. I have a lot of sympathy for Masana after I've seen, academia. It's like, if you were in academia too, you'd turn to the dark side. Jesus.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to make the point that like teaching is a skill, and just because you can do something doesn't mean you can teach it.
Yeah.
Being a science communicator is way harder than, well, not way harder, but it is, I think, a different skill than doing science.
Oh my God, that is one of my oldest soapboxes is the need for effective science communication. You know, like I was raised on Bill Nye. I understand how important this is. And
just like, and we don't put a priority on that for science communicators. Like we don't fund people based on how well they communicate. We fund people based on like research grants and shit like that.
Not gonna lie, that's part of why I got into podcasting. It's because it's like, here is a space in which my yelling about science might actually reach people who will listen and learn and give a shit. And obviously it's not most of what I podcast, but it was part of the appeal was this is a way for me to reach people with my take on science, because clearly regular science communication is doing badly. So if I can just throw it into some fantasy discussion, I might literally be Bill Nyeing for the 21st century.
and I was a math teacher for a couple of years. I felt like I developed a lot of skills about communication that I brought into the podcast. Like I do feel like the job as a teacher and practicing those 2 or 3 years of having that immediate feedback of students falling asleep in front of you or not did help me learn how to be a more effective communicator, and also the usefulness of really good analogies. There's a reason I use so many analogies, and that's from my teaching days, because it's the best way to get someone's interest when you're talking about math. Is to make because people don't, when you're talking about FOIL, first, in, or out, or last, people are like, what do you talk? Like, that's boring. But you're like, okay, think of it like a smiley face, or think of it like, there's other, talking about slope and various positions of bodies and using that. Anyway, it's a whole fucking thing that I enjoyed. Finding ways to communicate boring concepts through good analogies helps people remember them.
In geology, it's all basically just applied inorganic chemistry. That's pretty much what geology is. Food analogies. Everything is a fucking food analogy, because that's the only way to make it all make sense, because you walk in there with a general chemistry education, which is useful, but applied inorganic chemistry is like a really big step up. So it's just food analogy after food analogy to begin to make it make any kind of sense. It's, yeah.
So let's talk about Ispan.
Yes, Ispan.
Ispan is being tortured, but is also stuck with her 3 oaths, not to betray the Dark One until the hour of her death. Not a lot to go into other than the fact that she wants to tell Vandene and Adelius she is broken, but physically cannot tell them anything that is relevant. She can only give, dead dark friend names, and certainly none who are current sisters.
Plots that she heard about but wasn't involved in, things that happened a long time ago. And I guess that's why she gets meeker and meeker, is because she's broken fairly early on, and they keep pushing her after that point because they're figuring out that she's bound by an oath. And so she's just sort of along for the ride in a really horrible way. Obviously no sympathy for murderous dark friends, but also like, it's, torture is generally not a good way to get information. And she is literally incapable of giving them that. And they only figure that out through trial and error. And that's rough. We don't know how they're doing it, but clearly they're torturing her into meeker and meeker and meeker over time. Like, that's not great. I'm guessing nerve manipulation in some way.
And I assume that's why she ends up being killed, is because they're afraid that obviously Serene, however we want to say it,
Serene, I think.
The Dark Friend could have killed her at any time, but if she was giving away valuable information.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's worried about her giving away important information. She just gets killed because that's the punishment for getting captured, right? We've seen this before. Right.
So I don't really have anything else to say other than they continue to isolate Ispen as much as possible and continue with their questions. And, you know, you do have that problem of contradicting oaths, right? Like, we see that in the White Tower. If somehow they were able to pin her in an oath, I think it would be bad for her. And they don't know what the oaths are. So they're afraid to force her to do something that would either cause her to die or like that whole choking.
Well, the only reason that happens in the White Tower is because of the fourth oath for obedience.
Yes, but they don't know what the oaths are, right? They don't know what she's sworn. So they do. That's why they're going so carefully. Is they don't know if there's a fourth oath. So they don't know if there's something, if they're going to force her into betraying the dark, if she's immediately going to fall over dead.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know what results might come out from the oaths. Yeah. And so that's what they are focused on right up until the murder.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's not much to say because none of the information ends up meaning anything.
Then we get back to horny Nynaeve.
And talk about their marriage. Woo!
Yep.
Eager and afraid when she could sneak him off to a hayloft. It's like, Nynaeve, you naughty girl.
Eager and afraid.
I love that for you, but also, like, that's adorable.
And this is where we get details about the marriage.
Yes.
The sea folk believed in hierarchy, as they did in the sea, and they knew a woman or husband might be promoted one past the other many times in their lives. Their marriage rights took that into account. Whoever had the right to command in public must obey in private. And because they are not sea folk, Nynaeve will always have the ability to command in public, which means Lan always has the ability to command in private, which means there's some really kinky shit going. Like, basically, he gets to dominate in bed.
Yeah. And he does. He doesn't take advantage. Not really.
Not really.
So that means that she's into it, but also,
right.
You know, he's a very experienced sexual person, whereas she is extremely inexperienced. So it's quite the learning curve for her. Though I'm sure Lana's very, like, kind and considerate, you know, very, like, risk aware, consensual, like, all of that stuff. But at the same time, there's only so much consent within the bounds of a sea folk marriage.
And there's also, I think, one thing she's worried about, one of the reasons why she's being so careful not to be angry at him in public, is because if she's mean to him in public, he then gets to take it out on her in private. And so she doesn't want to give him that ammunition, that reason to then, in kind, punish her in private.
Right. Though I think, for sure, to be clear, I don't think that they've got, like, a domestic violence situation going on behind the scenes where he's, like, yelling at her and hitting her. Like, he's taking it out on her in, like, very fun, sexy ways. Because, and that's why he's so amused, is because he's like, yeah, I'm going to get you back for that. And she's like, she's not afraid. She's afraid. Right?
Exactly.
It's just different. Probably there's lots of spanking in RJ's imagining of that because he didn't put it on the page, we can headcanon whatever we want for Lan's kinks.
And I'm guessing there's some fanfic out there about...
I'm sure there's, like, terabytes.
In this case, Nynaeve's not the one pulling her braid.
No. It's great.
Tied to the bed by your own braid. Anyway.
Yeah, and Lan, this is honestly, I think, why Lan is able to come back to life, is because this is your root chakra. This is what the Aes Sedai think is supposed to keep people going. This is the core of what keeps the entire organic life experiment going, is sex. Like, sex as the root of how life works is like, that's going to get through your magic depression. You can't be depressed when you have a marriage that is clearly a sexual relationship that is clearly going as well as it is for Lan. Like, there's no way that that's not going to break through his magic depression.
Earlier, there's a thing where Nynaeve glares towards Elise and Lan chuckles softly watching her go. And then the second he sees Elayne, he stops smiling. But there is that, like, Nynaeve brings out the chuckle in him. it brings out the joy in life again.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't last very long when she's gone.
There's flickers of it there. You know, over the decades, she'll be able to fan it back to a proper fire. Like, it'll be fine. It's really funny. And I will say, I think it was a mistake for them to get a sea folk wedding. That was ridiculous. Like, that's what happens when you leap headfirst into someone else's culture without understanding it, because the sea folk have the cyclical nature of their power structure built into their marriage vows.
Right.
Whereas Aes Sedai and warders will never have that. So it's a very inappropriate custom for creating the healthy power dynamics that the sea folk have cultivated with their tradition. You've completely used it for not its intended purpose. And now it's a kinky relationship that's helping a man with depression, but it's not what the sea folk designed it for.
No, and we see the sea folk really don't treat each other very well in public. Like, there is that certain amount of, like, you have to be harsher on your loved ones and family.
Well, that's not with your marriage partners, though. We only really see that with children and siblings. We see much more respect with the few married couples we see.
You're right. Yeah, that is a good point.
And I think that that's because they know they're going to be trading it out. The concept of mutual respect is what's baked in. That your siblings or your children, you don't have a enforced power exchange. With your spouse, you do. So it's just, you know, go cultural appropriation. Woo. I don't think Nynaeve's profiting from it. It's just, I mean, she is profiting from it, but, you know, not in that way.
And then because this chapter jumps around so much, we're also jumping around a little bit. So another one of the T's, ter'angreal, is the next thing I have.
Yes, the ter'angreal section.
I was going to say the most interesting part, but again, it just turns right back into sexy territory. So
we can try to talk about the other ones for like 45 seconds.
But this is on the process of searching. Avienda's helping her. You know, Avienda hasn't figured out her talent yet.
But yes, this is Elayne going through the panniers to remove the junk and see if there's a more angreal. This is clearing out the garbage from the room where they found the bowl of the winds. This is getting rid of the table legs and the old shoes and discovering the ter'angreal that Avienda figures her skill out on later, but not yet.
And don't forget, like, Samael got a bunch of this stuff. That's where Grendel gets her little ring ter'angreal. That's where the stasis box comes from. Like, there was a lot of stuff in here. A lot of it got grabbed by the dark. And now this is just what they were able to get that wasn't stolen.
Yeah, but they've got 5 entire panniers on the pack horses full of magical objects, all ter'angreal. They haven't found any angreal or sa'angreal, but tons and tons of ter'angreal. And we get to see most of them in however many books in the future in Andor. But we do get to look at a couple here. Got a thing that looks like a blacksmith puzzle made of glass that gives her a headache. And I don't think we see that one again, but we do see the helmet made of fluffy metal feathers again, I think. I'm pretty sure Avienda picks that one up when she's looking through them and discovering her talent. I'm pretty sure the helmet with fluffy metal feathers is one of the things.
Yes. Knife of Dreams, chapter 15. It controls some sort of a machine. So essentially it is I always thought maybe for like a show wing or something like that, because it's got feathers on it, that it's a show wing pilot's helmet, that's what you put on to fly a show wing.
Did you ever read his Dark Materials?
Yeah, I loved it.
You remember in the airships, they literally have that. That's literally how they drive the like airship things, is with these helmets that they put on and then telepathically control the machine. Like when I read this, I was like, oh, it's like those helmets in Subtle Knife or Amber Spyglass. I forget which book, but yeah, it's literally that.
And no, I have no clue what the glass blacksmith's puzzle could be. That it makes her dizzy and unable to sleep. Like,
no, she just misfires it and then never deals with it again.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be gained from talking about that. I can't imagine what it is. I'm guessing it's some kind of computer. And she just broke her brain a little bit. But then we get to the red rod, the crimson rod, the definitely a dildo rod, the definitely made Elayne do a stripper pole dance routine on the table naked rod. I honestly can't decide if it's a dildo or if it's a stripper pole. I kind of want it to be a stripper pole, even though that's less like
not really what it's described.
Well, I'm imagining that it like expands like with the power to like fit whatever the space is. Like that's the regardless. This is a sexy time, ter'angreal.
I will say that again, Encyclopedia Watt, I have it open, says that the world of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, right, the big white book of bad art, does have a description. The red rod is activated by fire. It creates visual and oral illusions, but if the user is unwary, it may put her to sleep and broadcast her fantasies and dreams.
What? Oh.
So I think it's more of like a virtual reality porno.
Oh.
Like, it creates visual and oral illusions. It's basically you watch virtual reality porn, but if you're not doing it right, it takes what's in your head and broadcasts it out to everybody else. So maybe she falls asleep and everyone else sees her fantasies of dancing on the table.
I never looked that entry up. I don't really like it. I prefer it having her actually taking off her clothes and dancing on the table, as per Brigida's description in her joke later.
But maybe an image of her dancing. It doesn't necessarily have to be her, but maybe an image of her. But she's saying, "What did I do?" So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to choose to reject that supplemental material from my own headcanon.
I reject reality and replace it with my own.
Yes, precisely. But that is interesting. That is a funny idea that it projects your fantasies. Dangerous, ter'angreal. This is the one and only mention of the infamous Crimson Rod that feels hot and is activated by fire.
The only other thing we have is a reference to when someone makes a joke about taking off your clothes and dancing on the table.
Yeah, that's Brigida.
And then they giggle. And that's Brigida says that. And the assumption is that's a reference to this event, but it's not explicitly stated that that is a reference to this event.
I can't see what else it means because of a couple of different comments Avienda makes about it. There's a comment later where she says, "You've already played that joke on Elayne," to Brigida, referencing the fact that she said this line. It's a thing.
Let's see. It's actually in RJ's notes. I came across, again, this is here's a Reddit post, reading Linda's 13th depository on the article about ter'angreals. One possible side effect of channeling into this improperly is giddiness and a loss of inhibitions akin to drunkenness. The effect lasts for several hours, but thankfully on waking, you recall nothing of what you did. In fact, it can be used to induce a number of strong emotions in others, from hatred to fear, from love to lust, or to soothe those same emotions. It was actually a medical psychiatric device originally.
Oh. So she may have just literally tequila makes her clothes come off to the thing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, this is her cup of wine moment as well.
Yes, very much a repeat of the cup of wine. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In chat, treatment for hysteria.
Yeah. Basically, yes. This is a medical device to treat emotional distress.
And what we have here, boys, is treatment for hysteria.
My arm's getting sore. Must get a ter'angreal to help out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, continue the dirty thoughts. But I think this is one of those places where this chapter, I don't know what Jordan was doing. He was horny as fuck when he was writing this chapter. Seriously.
Yeah, it's a very horny chapter. But yeah, Elayne wakes up with no memory of anything, and nobody will tell her what happened, which forces us to have these hilarious conversations imagining what could have happened, because RJ just denies us a single detail through the characters not being willing to tell Elayne what she did, which is really funny.
I mean, just the description, wrist thick and a foot long, felt firm rather than hard. Like, it's just, that's a penis.
Makes her think of fire. Yeah. So then the next thing I've got is the timeline progression, the actual progression of the weather. 9 days after their flight from Abu Dar, scattered clouds appear. An intermittent drizzle falls on day 10. A deluge keeps them huddled inside on day 11. And then in the morning of day 12, thick flurries of snow are drifting down and covering everything. And suddenly their speed across the landscape has gone down to almost zero.
And Elayne's 2 weeks into Camelin suddenly becomes 2 months into Camelin.
Mm-hmm. And they are all don't have enough winter clothes, and Avienda solves the problem of them not having money by just pulling out the sack of jewels that she got from when she tried to give Rand Layman's sword. And he said, "I'll take the blade, but you get to keep the jewels." And she really wants to get rid of them, and it works as money. So she's very happy to just give it away to these villagers who didn't want jewelry, but want jewels. which is a little interesting lesson in economics.
Yep. It's interesting that these are layman's, like, that's where they came from. They're literally like the king of Cairhien. When he was killed, they were his and taken off his corpse. Passed
through several different Aiel hands, passed through the Dragon Reborn's hands, and now Avienda's trading them for wool cloaks in some random village in rural Andor.
Right. and it's like, oh, this is how the seals ended up in random farmers' hands.
Absolutely. And it's the thing about jewelry versus jewels. I don't know what lesson about economics it is, but I know there is a lesson about economics. I can't explain it, but I know there's something there. I think the line is one is frivolity and the other as wealth. I don't know what the complex economic phraseology for that is.
Yeah, what I'd say is fungible versus non-fungible barter, right? Because
but they're both fungible.
Jewelry is very personable. Jewelry is, that's my ring, that's your ring, right? As opposed to, these are a bunch of stones.
Gotcha. Okay, fair.
This is currency, right? Like coins, jewels, interchangeable items that sort of float on the open market. But yet nobody wants someone else's wedding ring.
Right. Right. And yeah, in a village like this, it's not like people have like large collections of jewelry. This would be like their one piece. And it's not worth trading like your nice winter coat for a piece of jewelry that will look very out of place with the rest of your stuff. I mean, you can still trade it. It's a silly, I'm with Nynaeve on thinking this is a silly choice on the part of the villagers, but I'm sure that there's a very real world phenomena that you could name being put on a display here. We also get a more tangible lesson, which is we have what they want, but they have what we need, which means they set the price. It's an important lesson in bargaining. Understand who has the wants and who has the needs, and thus how the price is set.
And thus our bargain is sealed. Yeah, Aviendha doesn't see them as valuable at all because of how she got them. They were literally... I love that Rand found the sword blade much more valuable than the jewels, because the jewels are easy. You know, anyone can get jewels, but a power-wrought sword blade?
He owns treasuries upon treasuries. There's only so many power-wrought swords.
Rand al'Thor tricked me, Aviendha muttered sullenly. I tried to buy my toe from him. I know that is the least honorable way, but I could see no other. And he stood me on my head. Why is it when you reason things out logically, a man always does something completely logical and gains the upper hand? And we talked a lot about that back when he gave her the jewels back, and how she was like, she was making all these comments about like, I have two kinds of toe, and one way to get rid of him is to kill Rand, the other is to kill myself, and that has a lot to do with the fact that she slept with him, and so she was trying to buy out that toe to him. Like, it's got really complicated with her honor and basically sleeping with him when she promised Elayne she wouldn't, but that's since been forgiven because they're now going to be first sisters.
Yeah, it's just proud Aiel make an absolute tangle out of the simplest things, basically. So yeah, then we get to the snow falling triggers the Windfinders saying we get to start claiming rewards, and thus Marilyl's life becomes a living hell for a while.
I'm assuming they get the Bowl of the Winds at this point, right? She demanded not only the Bowl of the Winds, but Myrell. And they don't say we didn't give her, like they gave her Myrell. I assume they gave them the Bowl of the Winds at this point. That I assume the Sea Folk now have possession of the Bowl of the Winds from this point forward.
I think they do.
It's never explicitly stated. That's my assumption.
I feel like it gets stated somewhere along the way, but it's sort of moot at this point because it's just in the baggage of the party. And I think it gets discussed in Andor at some point later on, but if so, we'll get there when we get there.
Well, and we do know the bowl was used in the last battle at Shale Ghul to control the weather.
By the Windfinders.
So, yeah.
Yes. That is how they contribute as a body, is by combating weather manipulation by the Dark One's forces. But yeah, Rhaenyra is an inspiration to Elise and Sumeko and some of the other kinswomen who are realizing that Aes Sedai are in fact human. And there's that whole debate.
I love Sumeko starts criticizing Nynaeve's healing weaves.
It's so amazing. As clumsy.
It's clumsy.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Which makes a lot of sense, like, because the two of them have both spontaneously come up with the better way of healing. Mm-hmm. But Sumiko has been doing it for several hundred years. Yeah! Nynaeve has been doing it for 5. You know, like, there's a reason, and yeah, there's a reason why she is the better healer, and it's it literally is in this case experience.
Yeah. And Nynaeve wouldn't mind so much, except that Sumiko just goes from cowering to completely blowing past her right away. You know, it's like if Sumiko had always been arrogant, that would be one thing. But like Nynaeve was taking pity on her and doing like a white savior kind of thing, you know, and then Sumiko's just like not buying into that. And Nynaeve's very offended that she's not getting her ally cookie.
But at the same time, Nynaeve's saying they need to grow some spine and stand up to the Aes Sedai. She just doesn't consider herself one of the Aes Sedai.
I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah. Any idea how old Sumiko is?
I did not look that up.
I'm going to really quick. Date of birth 598.
Wow.
Sumiko is old as shit.
Wow.
She's 400 years old, almost exactly, 402.
She's older than the oldest Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
No wonder she thinks Nynaeve is clumsy. She's just a little baby compared to Sumiko. There is a headcanon picture of Sumiko in chat, and I agree. This little old Asian lady clearly kicking ass at video games is definitely Sumiko.
And she spent 10 years in the tower. So she like learned, she knows flows, she knows channeling, she knows all that kind of stuff. So
Sumiko is the best of what the kin represent in so many ways.
And she broke down during her test and left. So she broke under the pressure. Yeah.
She's basically could have been a perfectly fine Aes Sedai if they had a system that was remotely rational or sane or humane in any way, shape, or form.
No, all you do is abuse them, and the ones that don't break are clearly the better ones. Duh.
My parents hit me when I was growing up, and I turned out fine. My parents didn't hit me when I was growing up.
No, mine neither.
I'm young enough that wasn't a thing.
Except for the one time I ran into the road in front of a bus.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah. And then we sort of have between Ispan and Meyrel being, treated like crap by the sea folk, and just like a bunch of women traveling all being angry at each other. The respect for the Aes Sedai is taking a major hit. Like Aes Sedai dignity is not on display here.
Well, you're seeing that they, sleep and shit and cry like everybody else, and they're not a different flesh, and they don't deserve intrinsic respect just for existing. I mean, they do because they're human beings, but like not in the way that the Aes Sedai carry themselves, where they have extra respect.
Oh my God, they really went to an inn called the New Plow. Nynaeve and Lan are at an inn called the New Plow.
I didn't catch that.
Jordan, you are a fucking horny bastard. All right.
Well, what was the one that she was at?
Jesus Christ.
during the Red Rod? That was at the Wild Boar. Because that's what teenage horny girls are.
Jesus Christ.
That's what teenage girls are. They're horny boars. Jordan loves in names.
I swear to God, he came in and he's just like, I'm going to see how much sexual innuendo I can put in this chapter. Like, I'm just going to pack it all in. I swear, I bet he lost a bet or something with his wife. Like, there's something going on in this chapter that is weird.
It's the second chapter you have identified as being the result of a bet because it has such a theme. But I mean, this is so horny. This is so horny. Beautiful. Elayne feels bad about having a fuck ton of Royal Highness's match luggage on this trip while everyone else is a refugee. She has like trunks and trunks and trunks. Nynaeve doesn't care because Nynaeve is a New Plow experience. But Elayne is like, oh, in order to be queen, I have to look good. I must make my peons carry my stuff. Oh, I'm such a hypocrite. And it's just, I love Elayne, but sometimes the 1% energy gets really strong.
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't realize they had chests of clothes when everyone else didn't, because I thought Elise made everybody leave their stuff behind.
Everybody from the farm. Elayne and Nynaeve were not from the farm. They had come with all of their shit already. So
who's carrying all their shit is my question.
The horses that came with Nynaeve and Elayne.
Gotcha. Okay.
But they didn't have the ability to take on any more stuff, even though they had to take on more people. So those people have to carry their own shit. It's fair, but Elaine's hand wringing over it is a little bit like, okay, Karen. It's not a Karen thing. It's not a Karen, but it has 1% energy.
Well, 1%ers would never give a shit. They'd just be like, yeah, it's mine. I don't know.
Self-aware 1%.
Yeah, I can see her. She's like, I get why I have to have this, but
yeah, it's you're going to a palace where you have apartments full of clothes.
Maybe they're probably old. I don't know. That dresses is like I don't care.
As a person who refuses to shop for clothes ever and just wears them until they literally are threadbare, I just have no sympathy for Elayne. I really need to make more. I'm actually currently wearing all clothes I made myself, and it's way more happy. I need to do that more often instead of scrolling fucking Facebook.
We get some more. Time has passed. We're now 16 days past the use of the Bowl of the Winds. It's been snowing for a couple of days. They've got, shitty cloaks. And she's thinking another week to Camelin is an optimistic estimate, even though they're more than halfway there.
Yes. They've been 16 days on the road, so a week and a half by Randland estimates. And she thinks another week, which is another 10 days. So she's thinking it's going to take another 10 days minimum. And I think it takes way more than that. I'd forget how long it takes, but it's more than that. It's just a downward slope on her speed.
I think it was about 4 or 5 years, if I remember correctly, in real time.
Yeah, fair.
Elayne is basically not in the next book, right?
I don't know.
Yeah. According to Morgan, in the last episode, she said, Elayne's just, not in the next book. So, it's quite a long time before we actually get her to take over Andor. But
yeah,
here we are. She finally starts the process.
Yeah. And chat is pointing out that she does look like she means serious business from moment one in order to begin her succession. But I just have an issue with the concept of entitlement to rule. I may be a slight anti-monarchist. I am learning this about myself.
Yeah.
So, I'm not qualified to have an opinion on her nuances. I should try, though, because it's my job now.
This is a book about rulers and inherited rule. Yeah.
I need to become okay with that and just stop critiquing it.
You realize this whole series is about one family, right? Eventually they're all one fucking family.
They're basically already one family.
Yeah.
All right. So Egwene, talking to Egwene.
Mm-hmm. So they're going back into ter'angreal to meet with Egwene based on their prearranged schedule.
Yes, but the schedule that Egwene was so foolish not to have set up, according to Romaine. But we know that it was just that she didn't share the schedule.
Right.
But yeah, the last time that they talked to her was when they had to tell her about the bargain that they made with the Sea Folk and what it was going to take to use the Bowl of the Winds and to give that memo that, hey, we're going to use the Bowl of the Winds. So that was the last time they talked to her. And she basically chewed them up one side and down the other, tore them a new asshole, and read them the riot act all at once. It was a lot.
Another parallel with Rand and Egwene, right? Their Aes Sedai go make a deal with the Sea Folk and come back and get just reamed out for just how bad of a deal it is.
That is a parallel. Yeah, they get back an Aes Sedai managed Sea Folk deal and they're just not happy.
Not happy. And then you get Nynaeve going through all the withering under the oh my god, I can't believe that Egwene is dressing me down. I spanked her bottom and changed her diapers to, oh yeah, no, I did make a mistake and she is the Amyrlin and I do have to obey and all that kind of stuff. So Nynaeve is going through the whole gambit of emotions. It's
an interesting contrast that Elayne and Nynaeve both do not enjoy the experience, but they respond in very different ways. Elayne knows that they fucked up and takes it very calmly and then is able to move on from it, whereas Nynaeve is writhing under it and then has to apologize really profusely. And there's this really high amplitude experience with Nynaeve, whereas Elayne is just steady and just endures the uncomfortable.
And Elayne is used to having her mother dress her down and she's used to powerful women telling her what to do. Nynaeve, not so much.
Right, absolutely. And Elayne respects Egwene as an equal, whereas Nynaeve struggles with accepting Egwene as an equal.
Who was her inferior.
And in Egwene's mind, she is by far and away their superior. So it's rough.
Yes, she's the Amyrlin seat at this point. We have gone past the point now where Egwene is, oh my god, I'm the what? Amyrlin seat? That's crazy. No, we're past that point.
Absolutely. So yeah, they go into ter'angreal to meet with her and they kind of pre-game a little bit to try to avoid getting her pissed off again. And they go and she's not there. There's still the messages from before, which is just stay in Camelin and be silent, be careful. And I think that this is because Egwene is currently kicking ass in the hall and getting war declared. I'm not sure if the timeline's right, but I think it is.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at that. Should we take a break and like check the 16 days after the snows?
Let's check that. Let's check that, yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to say is I don't like the mechanism of being able to channel and leave a message in the World of Dreams. I feel like that should fall apart. That is such a shitty thing. I don't think it should be in there. It's not used more than once. It would have been super easy to just not have that. I don't like it. I don't think there's anything solid enough to leave a message behind in ter'angreal.
After you've woken up? Like, I do not like it, and I'm really glad it doesn't get used very much.
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite mechanisms of the way the power and the World of Dreams interact.
I found the WotWiki page that has what I need. So
Gotcha.
Had to find the calendar sheet. Okay, so on the 20th... Elayne and Nynaeve leave a message for Egwene and ter'angreal. On the 17th and 19th, Egwene meets with the leaders of the Andoran and Mirandian armies. This is the night after she takes the hall, according to this website. The Feast of Abram is, I guess, the 19th. And where we're at the New Plow, when they're in the ter'angreal, that's the 20th. So the night before that was the Feast of Abram.
Gotcha.
Which is the night that she declares war. So this is the night after she declared war. Not the same night she declares war, the night after she declares war. And huge shout out to the creators of the WotWiki, because I knew that there had to be a chart like that put that together. And you go to whatfandom.com/wiki/1000NE #book 8. You will get taken to the right spot on a very long web page that will explain all of that. And it's beautiful. And I love nerds. Okay, so all I have is a few highlights in what I considered for the readout, because I also thought the readout should be kind of long.
Yeah.
They basically mention her plan to take over the hall is basically what happens in this. Is they're like, oh, I hope that her plans go well, because they know that that's what she's moving towards. But then Elayne's like,
right.
Shush, because Linny saying a secret spoken finds wings.
3 Linny sayings in one chapter.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. But that's really all I have highlighted about this fairly long readout. Do you have anything?
The only thing I have is just the really funny Elayne trolling Nynaeve by snapping her fingers behind her back. Like, that's just great. That's just super great trolling. And I give Elayne huge props for making Nynaeve jump, because Nynaeve deserves to jump, because she has a lot of fear of Egwene, and saying, it's that like when you're bad mouthing the principal and then your friend's looking at you with big eyes, and you're like, he's standing right behind me, isn't he?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Yep.
Totally.
That sort of energy. And then again, like we already talked about, Elayne puts her own message, 15 days. It's a stupid mechanic. It never gets used again. I'm glad. I'm headcanoning that it normally just doesn't work.
I'm nodding. Nynaeve strode to the window and peered out both ways, careful not to put her head out through the open casement. It was night out there, as in the waking world, a full moon gleaming on bright snow, though the air did not feel cold. No one else should be there except them, and if anyone was, it was someone to avoid. I hope she isn't having trouble with her plans, she muttered. She told us not to mention those even to each other, Nynaeve. A secret spoken finds wings. That had been another of Linny's many favorites. Nynaeve grimaced over her shoulder, then returned to peering down the narrow alley. It's different for you. I tended her as a child, changed her swaddling, smacked her bottom a time or two, and now I have to leap when she snaps her fingers. It's hard. Elayne could not help herself. She snapped her fingers. Nynaeve spun so fast that she blurred, her face pop-eyed with horror. Her dress blurred too, from blue riding silks to an acceptance banded white to what she referred to as good stout Two Rivers wool, dark and thick. When she realized Egwene was not there, had not been listening, she almost fainted with relief. When they stepped back to their bodies and woke long enough to tell the others they could come to bed, Aviendha certainly thought it a good joke, and Brigida laughed as well. Nynaeve had her revenge, though. The next morning, she woke Elayne with an icicle. Elayne's shrieks woke everybody else in the whole village. 3 days later, the first explosion came.
icicles in a frozen over lake. So we know that we're syncing timelines up, basically.
Not that you can't make an icicle with the power, but yes, it's probably her inspiration came from the icicles that were being formed by the weather.
And 3 days later, the first explosion. That's just the beginning of chapter 28. It's not much of a fucking explosion. It's a cliffhanger, but it's just the infighting.
Right, and she thinks frivolous thoughts about how frustrating it is, and then the murder happens, and she feels bad about joking about mentally to herself about how a murder is like clearly the outcome of this drama. But yeah, it's the infighting that follows Elayne is a theme that is not the most fun.
So yeah, chapter 28. Let me just... Oh, this is the explosion is when Adelius recognizes Garenia as Zarya, the novice who ran away. That's the explosion she's referring to.
That's the precipitating incident. That makes sense because it reaches into that fissure between the kin and the Aes Sedai.
Right, and all of a sudden you have some of the kin who are most respected are being treated like runaway novices. And this is after they've stopped respecting the Aes Sedai, so then you have all of this interpersonal craziness that happens in chapter 28.
So it's not the annoying eye roll drama. It's a very real, like, power dynamic is shifting and creating like intergroup dynamics that the individuals are expressing. It's not the same drama that has followed this particular crew thus far. It's a very important phase in their evolution.
Of like, how are we going to integrate the kin into the Aes Sedai? What's the relationship between the two groups? Like that, this has got a lot of implications for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is a very real, like we've had a lot of, like we were talking about, rejected. Like Sumiko has been rejected from the White Tower, but for the first time you have someone who actively ran away.
Right. That difference there where they can actually say, you are a runaway. That's a big difference.
And then you have the one Aes Sedai who's like, I ran away 400 years ago. And they're like, oh, yeah, we totally would have caught you if you hadn't told us. What the fuck?
Yeah. It's, oh, man, that's such an awkward one.
But yeah, though that's the explosion we're leading into for the next one. It's just more interpersonal stuff between the various groups.
The stakes getting high.
Those cows should not have access to marijuana.
Well, that was a fun chapter. I enjoyed that. Thank you for doing that. And thank you to our audience for being here, the live people. And thank you to our listeners, as always.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I feel like we pulled some valuable stuff out of that one, despite it being one of the more, I think, slow chapters in this book.
No, that one did not slap.
Yeah.
This chapter does not slap. It's just sort of a necessary connective chapter, which is fine. They can't all slap. That would be a very intense read that would fizzle out quickly. Bold of you to assume I'm ever not actively using Discord.
Well, then it's on my phone, so.
I'm actually trying really hard to realize how much time I'm spending on all social media, including Discord, and how much I could be doing with my life if I didn't. It's a thing I'm really...
It is a thing.
Need to do less of.
So any interesting developments that we want to include on the podcast with our lives?
I don't know. We're doing this recording just the two of us. We have more guests coming for the rest of the book, but not today. I don't really... There's nothing much has changed.
Life continues.
Shit's chill for us. Obviously, things are different in Ukraine. That's less chill. But there's no events happening in podcast land. My life's chill. It's been raining again, which is nice. Spring is spring. Oh, this is important news. Extremely important news. The swallows are back.
Ooh.
And the turkey vultures are back.
Yeah, spring has sprung around here. It is nice outside.
Celestial equinox is on Sunday the 20th. That's when we will actually truly be hitting our, 12-12 of, light and dark. But the spring birds are back. Turkey vultures are obviously one of my favorite birds of all time because they are the best. And the tree swallows, barn swallows, and violet green swallows, I'm still bad at telling them apart, are a very distinct part of the soundscape and also mosquito control where I live. There's 1 billion mosquitoes because I live between 2 streams, and there's also 1 billion bats and 1 billion swallows to take care of them. And there's a huge barn we live next to that houses all of them. It's great. So it was really, I've been waiting for them to come back, and they showed up just like a week ago. And it was since we talked last, in less than a week ago. So that's really fun, wonderful sign that spring is springing so hard. The air smells so different. You know, the plants are really starting to go. The light is almost half and half.
My allergies are kicking up something fierce.
Yeah.
You missed a real opportunity to say you live between 2 rivers.
I did. Mm-hmm. Well, if the damn winter rains would just freaking show up, then I would literally be between 2 rivers instead of 2 creeks that can sometimes become rivers. Just throwing shade at the weather.
Yep.
It's been not nearly rainy enough this year, but I live on very flashy streams. That's the official hydrologic word, which means that when it rains, the water level increases really dramatically and then it goes down again fairly quickly. So a dry winter means we've had eerily summer-like flow. But whenever it rains, it comes back up to where it should be all the time during winter.
It's almost like the climate's changing. It's the other reason why it's spring so early. It's not officially spring yet, but when everything's getting warmer, spring starts a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and that's something that I need to start tracking here is when the start of spring is. I have those 2 bird arrivals noted on my weather reports that I do. I mean, it is there, but I need to actually create a more of a database where I can input these things and have that come out in graphs and stuff like that fairly easily. More data!
Other consistent measurements that you can do from year to year and track the date in which they happen.
Yeah. I am parked in one spot now. I can afford to do that kind of long-term observational study. I just need to create a data input and warehouse method that makes it intelligible after the fact and easy to input in the first place.
I actually really, I think there's an interesting article about how when things change slightly slower than people's lifetimes, everyone is born into the new normal and don't realize things are changing. You know, like climate change is still slow enough that most people don't see a lot of effects in their lifetime. Or if they do, it's been 20 years and no one's doing that data collection to understand, like, oh, spring is here. But they don't understand that it's 2 weeks earlier than it used to be. And so it's just like, it's very easy. I think it was actually in context of the fishing industry. That overfishing is a problem in the fishing industry because it's happened slow enough that every time someone gets into the industry, they think X amount of fish is normal. And by the time they get out, yes, it's slightly less. But they don't realize that actually over the last 100 years, it's gone from 100% to something like 10 or even 5% of what it used to be.
Same with like forests, right? I mean, we live in the Pacific Northwest and just there will always be more forests to cut. And no.
So sustainability. I mean, it's amazing how much that's just. If we want the wheel to keep turning, we can't burn through all our resources.
Yeah,
right?
unsustainable growth has also been described as cancer. Unlimited growth will find itself limited by a lack of medium.
More and more, I think Agent Smith may have had a point.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
On that note, shall we engage in some lighthearted escapism?
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?